My fiancée demanded. I pay for a full-time caregiver for her mother. I replied, Of course, honey. I hired one. But it wasn't a nurse. It was a private investigator. The next week, I gave her a detailed report, showing that her mother was perfectly healthy and that they had been using the money to pay off her mom's gambling debts. You know, the worst thing they can do is weaponize your ethics against you. I'm Adrian, 40 years old, and my world is about managing money, specifically large, long-term investment funds here in New York. My job demands that I calculate risk and trust only facts. My fiancée, Lena, 38, was beautiful, charismatic, and entirely dependent on manipulation. She wasn't interested in my funds. She was interested in my signature and my sense of obligation. The problem wasn't Lena. It was her mother, Mrs. Rose. For 2 years, Lena had been running a constant, low-grade financial triage for her mom, always covering unexpected medical bills or urgent home repairs. I always helped. I believed in supporting family. It was my weakness. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Lena sat me down, looking genuinely distressed, and presented the final, massive demand. Adrian, we need to talk about my mother. Her health is failing. She can't live alone anymore. She wasn't asking for my sympathy. She was setting a price. The doctors said she needs full-time supervision. It's serious. I can't quit my job, so we need to hire a private, certified caregiver. The estimated cost she laid out was staggering, $5,000 a month for continuous specialized nursing care. It would be a continuous drain on my income, potentially jeopardizing our entire retirement plan. I looked at her, and the numbers didn't align. Mrs. Rose was 70, yes, but she was sharp, she drove her own car, and she played tennis twice a week. Her health was failing. It was the final, most brazen lie. I knew the refusal would destroy our relationship. It would confirm every suspicion she had about me being heartless and cheap. But the demand was too high, the risk too great, and the lie too obvious. I decided to call her bluff with a single, precise move. I looked at the woman who was willing to sell my sense of family responsibility for cash. Of course, honey, I replied, maintaining a perfectly level voice. We have to take care of her. We will hire a full-time caregiver. Lena's relief was immediate. Her tension dissolved, replaced by a triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She had no idea that I wasn't hiring a nurse. I was hiring a spy. We will hire a full-time caregiver. The moment I said that, I was already dialing the number for a private investigative firm. The game was on. This wasn't about finding out if Mrs. Rose was sick. I needed to know what she was really using my $5,000 a month for. I went straight to a retired NYPD detective I knew, a guy named Sal, who runs a discreet firm specializing in financial tracing. I told Sal the setup. Lena thinks I'm hiring a nurse. I need you to be the caregiver. Sal was perfect. A big guy, gentle demeanor, and a complete master of surveillance and data extraction. He immediately created a fake persona. Robert, a specialized male home healthcare aide. Lena bought the cover story immediately. She was thrilled I found a male caregiver so quickly. She introduced Sal to her mother, Mrs. Rose, with an air of relief. Mom, this is Robert. He's here to take care of everything. Now you don't have to worry. The contrast was hilarious and painful. Mrs. Rose was completely capable. She spent the first 3 days trying to make Robert, Sal, coffee and asking him to help her alphabetize her massive collection of mystery novels. Sal's reports to me were immediate and detailed. Day 1. The patient is 100% ambulatory. Beat me 4 times in gin rummy. Heart rate normal. Asked for help booking a bus ticket to Atlantic City. Atlantic City. That was the first real clue. I directed Sal to focus on 2 things: Mrs. Rose's daily routine and her banking activity. I needed to see where the urgency was truly coming from. Sal, the masterful caregiver, quickly gained Mrs. Rose's trust. He drove her to the grocery store, took her to her bridge club, and, crucially, drove her to the bank. Sal managed to retrieve copies of her financial statements under the guise of helping her manage her complex finances. The numbers were staggering. Mrs. Rose wasn't paying for health care. She was paying off massive recurring debts to several high-interest online loan services. The word gambling wasn't written on the statements, but the pattern of high-volume, erratic transfers to offshore accounts and rapid cash withdrawals was undeniable to a financial professional. This was the source of the $5,000 per month demand. Lena wasn't trying to save her mother's life. She was trying to subsidize her mother's addiction. But the betrayal ran deeper. Lena had been involved in managing these debts. She knew the danger. She knew the cost. And she decided that leveraging my sense of obligation was easier than helping her mother get treatment. I now had the scientific truth. Mrs. Rose was physically healthy, but financially, the situation was terminal. The next step wasn't calling a nurse. It was confronting the architect of the lie. The worst feeling wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that I was looking at systemic financial destruction dressed up as family duty. She needs help booking a bus ticket to Atlantic City. That was the text Sal, my private investigator, sent me. Atlantic City. I looked at the bank statements Sal had forwarded: transfers to offshore gambling sites, rapid cash withdrawals. Lena wasn't trying to save her mother from falling. She was trying to finance her mother's addiction. The $5,000 monthly caregiver fee wasn't for oxygen tanks. It was for the bookie. I went straight to my lawyer. I needed to act, but I needed the action to be completely shielded by legal protocol. I told my lawyer the absolute truth. I was being asked to finance a gambling habit under fraudulent pretenses of caregiving. I needed to terminate the engagement, recover the initial month's payment, and ensure this debt wouldn't become my problem. But the main target wasn't the money. It was Lena's moral authority. She thought she was operating on a higher ethical plane, filial responsibility. I was about to prove her actions were purely criminal. My final move was to confront Lena in a situation where she had nowhere to run. I called her. "Honey," I said, my voice sweet and calm. "Robert, Sal, just sent me the first financial report." She was instantly defensive. "Why is he sending you anything?" "That's confidential." "He is an employee of mine, Lena," I reminded her gently. "And I'm the one paying the $5,000. I have a right to audit the expenses." "Well, everything is fine. Mom is stable. You can talk to Robert yourself," she snapped, clearly confident in Sal's cover. "I plan to," I said. "But not over the phone. I want to discuss the findings, specifically the Atlantic City bus ticket and the offshore transfers, in person, with you present." She went silent. I heard the blood drain from her face over the phone line. She knew Sal's caregiving had exposed the entire network of lies. "How do you know about Atlantic City?" she whispered, the panic real now. "I hired a caregiver, Lena. Not a nurse, a highly trained private investigator. I delivered the terms. We meet tomorrow at the Four Seasons Lounge. You bring Mrs. Rose. I bring the receipts. This ends with honesty, or it ends with a fraud investigation." I needed Mrs. Rose there. I knew the mother had been complicit in the lie, but she needed to see her daughter's cruelty. The fact that Lena was willing to expose her mother's addiction to extract money from me. I hung up. I didn't wait for her to agree. The structural flaw in their deception had been found. It was time to pull the plug on the false reality they had manufactured. How do you know about Atlantic City? Man, hearing the sheer panic in Lena's voice was the confirmation I needed. She knew the secret was out. I went to the Four Seasons Lounge the next day. I showed up early, wearing a simple suit, carrying a thick folio. It looked like I was carrying investment documents. I was carrying their ruin. Lena arrived first, dragging her mother, Mrs. Rose, behind her. Mrs. Rose looked terrified. She knew the meeting was about the money, but she didn't know the depth of the betrayal. Lena tried to take the lead immediately, pushing the narrative. Adrian, you need to apologize to my mother for sending that spy into her home. I ignored her. I looked directly at Mrs. Rose. Mrs. Rose, how was your trip to Atlantic City last month? Mrs. Rose froze. She looked at Lena, whose eyes were wide with sudden, uncontrolled rage. What trip? Mrs. Rose stammered, appealing to her daughter for the lie. Lena, what is he talking about? He's lying, Mom. He's trying to sabotage us. He's just cheap. Lena shrieked, lunging across the small table. I placed the folio on the table and gently put my hand on it, preventing her from grabbing the proof. I am not lying, Mrs. Rose. Your daughter and you have been running a systematic financial fraud against me under the guise of elder care. Then, the systematic reveal began. I opened the folio and slid the first document across the table. This is the transcript from the private investigator I hired, the man you called Robert. He documented every trip to the bank, every rapid withdrawal, and every time you asked him to check the bus schedule to Atlantic City. Mrs. Rose didn't cry. She stared at the paper with an awful, painful realization. The money, she whispered. It was for the loans. I told her I couldn't pay them. Loans? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Or gambling debts, Mrs. Rose? I slid the second set of documents, the bank statements Sal had retrieved. They showed massive recurring payments to high-interest offshore accounts. Lena broke down completely. He stole those. It's a lie. I was helping Mom manage her finances, you monster. You were helping yourself, I corrected. Your mother's gambling debt was $5,000 per month. You demanded I pay for a caregiver to cover the exact same amount. You didn't want a nurse. You wanted me to pay your mother's bookie. Mrs. Rose looked at Lena, a true, profound sorrow on her face. You knew, Lena. You knew about the gambling, and you didn't help me. You just took his money. The accusation shattered Lena's defense. She had been exposed not just as a thief, but as a daughter who was willing to exploit her mother's addiction for financial gain. Lena turned on her mother, desperate to salvage the situation. You lied to me. You told me it was just medical bills. I told you the truth, Lena, Mrs. Rose yelled back. You just chose to believe the lie that let you keep working. The moral compass of the family had been destroyed. I stood up, allowing them to face the wreckage of their trust. The deal is off, I said to Lena. The financial obligation is terminated. I'll be in contact with your lawyer. I hope the money was worth destroying the only person who was willing to help you both. You just chose to believe the lie that let you keep working. That's the last thing Mrs. Rose screamed at her daughter before the whole lounge erupted into sobs and accusations. I didn't need to say another word. I stood up from the table, picked up my folio, and walked away. The physical tension was gone, replaced by a cold, operational calm. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, The conversation wasn't about divorce yet. It was about risk mitigation and ethical closure. I needed to make sure Lena's exploitation of her mother's illness, the initial $5,000 payment I made, was recovered, and the danger of that gambling debt contaminating my assets was neutralized. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Vivian, looked at the financial reports I gave her. She saw the patterns, the casino accounts, the rapid cash withdrawals, the misrepresentation of the caregiver fee. "Adrian," Vivian said, shaking her head, "this isn't just about a breakup. This is fraud. We can file against her for misrepresentation and recover every cent you spent." But the money wasn't the point anymore. The point was the truth reaching the system. I gave Vivian 2 specific instructions for the next 24 hours. Instruction 1. Full disclosure to the debtors. I instructed Vivian to send a copy of the gambling debt transfer logs, the evidence Sal had retrieved, directly to the high-interest loan companies Mrs. Rose was dealing with. The note was simple. This debt is being transferred to a rehabilitation program. Any contact with Mrs. Rose will be met with a formal harassment complaint. I was cutting off the predators who were feeding on Mrs. Rose's addiction, using the threat of my legal team to enforce the shutdown. Instruction 2. The public moral takedown. I drafted a long, detailed email to Lena's firm's HR department and the professional regulatory body overseeing her consulting work. The email didn't mention cheating. It focused solely on the ethical breach, using her elderly mother's alleged health crisis to fraudulently solicit a massive, sustained income stream from her fiancé. I knew Lena prided herself on her ethical reputation as a consultant. That was her greatest asset. I was attacking the core of her professional image. I attached the crucial pieces of evidence: Sal's logs showing Mrs. Rose's physical activity, and the original financial statements showing the offshore gambling transfers. I then sent Lena the final, decisive text message. I filed the report with the ethics board. Your professional life is now being audited by facts. The effect was instantaneous and widespread. Lena's career, her social standing, and her ability to manipulate were all collapsing at once under the weight of documented truth. I didn't need to yell at her. I didn't need a shouting match. I just needed to let the system she scorned, the system of rules and data, deliver the final, crushing verdict. Your professional life is now being audited by facts. That was the line. The final communication I sent to Lena. The absolute terror in her final incoming calls, which I let go to voicemail, confirmed the hit was critical. She knew that the ethical board would destroy her career faster than any personal fight. The next day, I filed for divorce. I also used Vivian's firm to file a small civil suit against Lena for the recovery of the initial $5,000 caregiver fee. The money wasn't the goal. The goal was to force her into a public legal admission that the caregiver premise was fraudulent. The fallout was instant and systemic. Lena's career, built on trust, ethics, and image, collapsed immediately. Her firm placed her on immediate administrative leave pending the ethics review. Her clients, seeing the public records of the fraud complaint, began canceling their contracts. She was utterly isolated. She had burned her bridges with me, and now her own ethical breach was isolating her from her professional identity. But the most satisfying consequence was the fate of her mother, Mrs. Rose. I called Mrs. Rose's bank, and using the evidence Sal had obtained, initiated a mandatory gambling addiction intervention protocol with her financial institution. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of genuine care for the old woman's welfare, which Lena had exploited. I arranged for Mrs. Rose to receive a full financial counseling plan and secured an initial deposit into a new, safe account. Money I used from the $5,000 I recovered from Lena. Lena's ultimate defeat was the realization that she had failed to exploit both of our vulnerabilities. She tried to use my sense of duty, obligation, to finance her scheme. And I used her own scheme's failure to fund her mother's recovery. Lena tried to fight the civil suit, but Vivian was merciless. We had the signed financial statements, the transcript of her admission, and the evidence that Mrs. Rose was not sick. Lena, facing potential disbarment from her consulting board and massive legal fees, was forced to settle quickly. She repaid the $5,000 and formally renounced any and all claims against me. She lost her fiancé, she lost her career, and most devastatingly, she lost her moral authority over her mother. I kept in contact with Mrs. Rose, ensuring she was receiving proper help for her addiction and financial management. She never failed to apologize for her daughter's actions, her voice filled with shame and gratitude. I walked away from the entire situation financially whole and ethically clean. Lena thought she was clever enough to use my compassion as a weapon. I proved that compassion, when backed by data and ethical principles, is the strongest fortress of all. The moral high ground was defended, and the exploiter was ultimately held accountable by the very system she thought I was too soft to enforce. The greatest relief wasn't the final signed settlement. It was the sudden, total silence from my phone, the sound of her toxic influence finally being neutralized. Lena thought she was clever. She thought she could weaponize my compassion. But she found out the hard way that an analyst who manages multi-million-dollar funds doesn't leave loopholes in his personal life. I recovered the $5,000 she stole, but I didn't keep it. I used the money to start a new, constructive project. I worked with a nonprofit in New York, one that deals with financial literacy and addiction recovery, and used the recovered money to establish a specialized relief fund for families dealing with predatory lending driven by gambling. It was my way of taking the pain of the past and transforming it into real, sustainable security for someone else. The irony was satisfying. The money Lena stole to fuel a lie was now being used to fund honesty. I kept in contact with Mrs. Rose, Lena's mother. She never failed to call and apologize for her daughter's actions, her voice filled with deep, aching shame. Mrs. Rose is now in therapy and recovering. I didn't do it for Lena. I did it because I had genuine compassion for an elderly woman whose vulnerability was being exploited by her own daughter. Lena? Her career was, predictably, incinerated. The professional board placed a permanent censure on her record. Who hires an ethics consultant who uses fraudulent means to fund her personal life? She lost her firm, she lost her clients, and she eventually had to move out of the city, stripped of the professional status she valued more than her own mother's health. Her final, pathetic attempt to contact me was a lawyer's letter demanding I stop funding the addiction recovery account, claiming it was an invasion of her family's privacy. I just laughed and forwarded the letter to Vivian, my lawyer. The final system check was complete. Lena was still trying to control a situation she no longer had any access to. I sold the apartment we shared. It was tainted by the sound of her lies. I bought a small, quiet, modern home outside the city, a place where the only risks I calculated were market risks, not emotional ones. My life is cleaner, simpler, and absolutely honest. I often think about the final moment in the lounge. She thought her emotional appeal would guarantee her victory. She didn't realize that in the world of investment, emotional leverage is a liability. I had defended my ethical principles, protected an innocent elderly woman, and secured my financial future. I walked away financially whole and ethically justified. That was the perfect closure, the honest ending.